This lesson is the first in a series of 3 on the structures that make up English sentences. Grammarians call this aspect of grammar syntax. In this first lesson, we will focus on the various ways that clauses can combine to create sentences. In the second lesson, we will look at the structure of the clauses themselves and the phrases that they contain. And in the third lesson, we will concentrate on exceptions to the common word order in clauses. Let's start with the 2 fundamental terms that will be used throughout this series of lessons on syntax, namely sentence and clause. Some definitions of sentence include the phrase a complete thought. See the examples on the slide. But for the purposes of this analysis, an orthographical definition is more useful. For example, Collins' dictionary defines sentence as a group of words which, when they are written down, begin with a capital letter and end with a full stop, question mark, or exclamation mark. This is a better basis for syntactic analysis than the vague concept of a complete thought. As for the definition of clause, matters are equally complicated. Modern descriptive grammarians consider non-finite structures, as shown in red here, to be clauses. They are embedded within what they call a matrix clause in each case. In this lesson, however, we will stick with the traditional definition of the clause as a group of words consisting of a subject and a finite form of a verb. This is the definition that native English speakers and non-native learners of English are currently most likely to be taught in class. It is found in dictionaries and in grammar textbooks such as Warrener's English Grammar and Composition. So, by the traditional definition of clause, namely a group of words consisting of a subject and a finite form of the verb, the words "they laughed" is a clause. It contains both a subject, they, and a finite verb, laughed. Of course, "they laughed" is also a sentence by both the complete thought definition and the orthographic definition just discussed. Clauses are basically of 2 types: independent clauses and dependent clauses. An independent clause is a clause that makes sense when standing alone. So, rain fell all day is an independent clause. Here, it is acceptable to say that the clause expresses a complete idea or thought. The other clauses here are all independent clauses with a single subject and a single predicate. On the other hand, the group of words "because she was so tired" makes no sense by itself. It does not stand alone as a complete idea. It depends on an independent clause to complete and clarify its meaning. So, "because she was so tired" is classified as a dependent clause. The other clauses here are also dependent clauses. As you can see, they all start with a subordinating conjunction. So, dependent clauses are also called subordinate clauses. The first dependent clause from the previous slide is completed here by the addition of an independent clause, also called a main or principal clause. Note that the 2 clauses can be reversed, as shown in the other examples. Now that we have our working definitions of the sentence and the clause, we are ready to categorize sentences according to their various structures. The teaching of English to native speakers makes use of this categorization system to help students become effective communicators in their own writing and competent readers of the writing of others. Pause the lesson if you wish to review the definitions. For the purposes of this lesson, there are 6 sentence structure types that will be analysed. These are simple, compound, complex, compound complex, run-on, fragment and rambling. The first 4 of these are what one could loosely call correct or grammatical, and the last 3 are problematic in various ways, as we shall see later. As an aside, note that sentences can also be categorized according to their functions: declarative, interrogative, imperative, exclamatory. All these sentence structures exemplified in this analysis will be declaratives, by far the most common sentence type. Declaratives are sentences that make statements such as "I'm tired" or "she prefers coffee to tea." Quiz page. Pause the video if you want to review the questions and answers before continuing. A simple sentence is a single independent clause. So, "Rain fell all day" is a simple sentence that consists of a clause that makes sense standing by itself. It is independent. It has a subject, rain, and a finite verb, fell, in its predicate, fell all day. The predicate gives information about the subject. Simple sentences are generally shorter than the other correct sentence types, but they can also be very long, as exemplified in the second sentence on the slide. The subject is blue and the predicate is red. The simple subject and the simple predicate, that is the finite verb, are underlined: girl and walked. A simple sentence, which as we have seen is a single independent clause, can have a compound subject. For example, Marie and her friends in the sentence, "Marie and her friends organised an event to raise funds for the local dog shelter." In the same way, a simple sentence can have a compound verb. For example, accelerated and swerved in "The driver accelerated and swerved to avoid hitting the cat." The second sentence type is the compound sentence. This is a sentence with 2 or more independent clauses joined by a coordinator, that is, a coordinating conjunction. The coordinators are often referred to in English teaching materials via the mnemonic fanboys. The most common of the coordinators are and, but, or so. Here are examples of compound sentences with these 4 words. In all cases, there are 2 or more independent clauses, each with its own subject and finite verb. Note that in the first clause of the last sentence, both the subject and the verb are themselves compounds. The subjects are shown in blue and the predicate verbs in red. The third sentence structure type is the complex sentence. A basic complex sentence has 2 clauses, an independent or main clause and a dependent or subordinate clause. The 2 clauses are joined by a subordinator, that is, a subordinating conjunction. In this first set of examples, the main or independent clause comes first. And in the second set of examples, the main clause follows the subordinate clause. The clause which comes first is the primary topic or focus of the sentence. There is more on topic focus in the third lesson in this series on syntax. A less common complex sentence type has 2 or more dependent clauses. Here are examples with the independent clauses shown in red and the dependent clauses shown in black. The fourth correct sentence type is the compound complex sentence. A compound complex sentence has 2 or more independent clauses, like a compound sentence, and at least one dependent clause, like a complex sentence. Here are 4 examples. The independent clauses are black and the dependent clauses are red. Let's now turn to the first of the sentence types that I have labelled problematic, namely the run-on sentence. A run-on sentence is typically a sentence with 2 or more independent clauses that are not joined by a conjunction or a semicolon. In each of the examples here, the second independent clause starts with the word shown in red. In fact, they would be marked by English teachers not just as problematic, but as incorrect or ungrammatical. A more common type of run-on sentence is one in which the independent clauses are joined by a comma. Here are the same sentences as before, with commas between the clauses. This particular type of run-on sentence is called a comma splice. Most English teachers would mark these sentences as incorrect. There is a subset of comma splice run-ons in which the second independent clause begins with an adverb that is used as a conjunction. For example, she loves to read books, however she doesn't have much time to do so. And they played soccer in the park, then they had a picnic. As you can see from these screenshots, Microsoft Word does not like this usage. But some English teachers may consider the conjunctive comma splice acceptable. There is a final type of comma splice that is probably acceptable to English teachers when it is done knowingly to create a certain stylistic effect. For example, in the cause of brevity, rhythm, or emphasis. One such comma splice is Julius Caesar's famous boast, "I came, I saw, I conquered." Here are more examples. Quiz page. Pause the video if you want to review the questions and answers before continuing. The second kind of problematic sentence is the fragment sentence, or sentence fragment. This is a group of words that is missing a subject or a predicate with a finite verb. So it cannot stand alone as a complete thought or an independent clause. Fragments are common in spoken language, particularly in answer to questions. But traditional English language teaching materials generally treat fragments in written language as a problem to be avoided or corrected. Warrener's English Grammar and Composition, which is commonly used by teachers of English in American schools, has a whole section on fragments, how to detect them and how to correct them. Here are 5 of Warrener's examples of fragments, shown in italics. The standalone dependent or subordinate clauses in the last 2 examples are a common manifestation of fragment sentences, also known as non-sentences. If you are reading the transcript of this video, you may have noticed the 2 fragments in the previous paragraph, namely how to detect them and how to correct them. Microsoft Word's Spelling and Grammar Checker alerts the writer to such problems as shown in the screenshot. It is important that learners are taught what fragments are and how to avoid them or fix them. But many of the fragments in written text have a justification. And good teachers will instruct older students in the circumstances in which fragments are justified, or even the better stylistic choice. Here's a good summary of those circumstances. The third type of problematic sentence is the rambling sentence. Rambling sentences typically have more than 3 clauses. Young writers in particular are prone to stringing several independent clauses together with coordinating conjunctions, as in these examples. Rambling sentences written by more experienced writers usually contain dependent and embedded clauses, not simply consecutive independent clauses joined by a conjunction. But common to the typical rambling sentences of both experienced and inexperienced writers is the desire to pack as much information as possible into a single sentence. Here is one example. Such sentences are problematic since in many cases the reader may react negatively to them, experiencing confusion, impatience, or irritation. Furthermore, non-native speakers are likely to have difficulty comprehending rambling sentences with multiple clauses, such as the one on the slide. In this lesson, we have looked at the ways that English sentences can be classified according to their structures, using the traditional terminology and classification system. Knowing about the various types of correct and problematic sentences can help writers of English to construct effective, extended pieces of writing in the various genres. This slide contains 2 pieces of writing advice that rely on a knowledge of sentence and clause types. Quiz page. Pause the video if you want to review the questions and answers before continuing. Okay, you've now come to the end of this first lesson on English syntax. Here is a summary of the important information about this grammatical topic. In the description below this video, you will find a link to the lesson index page shown on the left. As you can see, there are 4 ways to access the content, as well as a glossary and links to quizzes and more information on the topic.